Hi, I'm Jake Wilson, and today I want to share my analysis of something unprecedented happening in Canada. Thousands of Albertans are lining up to sign petitions demanding their province leave Canada and become America's 51st state. This isn't speculation. This is happening right now in January 2026, and the videos are going viral across social media. But here's what most people don't understand. This isn't just about politics. This is about the fundamental breakdown of Canadian unity, triggered by forces that go far deeper than most realize. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this movement represents something much bigger than provincial frustration, something that could reshape North American geography forever. Before we dive deep into this story, if you appreciate in-depth analysis like this, hit that like button and subscribe to stay informed on the stories that truly matter. Sources are listed in the description. And remember, this is educational analysis based on public reports. Let me start with what we know for certain. According to multiple social media reports and viral videos circulating on X, formerly Twitter, thousands of Alberta residents have been queuing at petition stations across the province. The stated goal, according to these unverified claims, is simple but shocking. They want Alberta to secede from Canada and petition to become the 51st state of the United States. The viral nature of this story cannot be ignored. Posts from accounts like Abalouden have garnered over 8,000 likes and 1,500 reposts, showing long lines of people waiting to sign these separation petitions. Another post from Eric L. Daw went even more viral, accumulating over 60,000 likes. These aren't small numbers. These represent massive engagement around what could be the most significant political movement in modern Canadian history. But here's where this gets really interesting. In my analysis, this isn't happening in a vacuum. This is the direct result of a perfect storm of economic pressure, political frustration, and strategic miscalculation that's been building for years. Alberta has always been different from the rest of Canada. This province produces roughly 80% of Canada's oil and gas. It contributes billions in federal taxes. It's home to some of the largest energy reserves in the world. And for decades, Albertans have felt that Ottawa takes their money while implementing policies that strangle their economy. According to industry sources, the frustration reached a breaking point when federal carbon taxes and pipeline restrictions began seriously impacting Alberta's energy sector. Some reports suggest that Albertans believe they send approximately $20 billion more to Ottawa annually than they receive back in federal spending. Whether these exact figures are accurate, the perception of unfair treatment is real and widespread. Now, here's what makes this current petition movement particularly significant. This isn't just about traditional Western alienation. According to some unverified claims, this movement has gained momentum specifically because of recent geopolitical developments involving the United States and Canada. Some industry speculation indicates that Donald Trump's recent policies and statements about Canada have created an unexpected opportunity for Alberta separatists. If certain reports prove accurate, these activists believe that joining the United States would give Alberta direct access to American energy markets without federal Canadian interference. Think about the economics for a moment. Alberta's oil sands contain an estimated 175 billion barrels of recoverable oil. The province produces roughly 4.5 million barrels per day. Under Canadian federal policy, much of this production faces carbon pricing, pipeline restrictions, and export limitations. But as a U.S. state, according to separation advocates, these restrictions would disappear overnight. The psychological impact cannot be understated either. There are claims within the industry that many Albertans feel more cultural affinity with Texas, North Dakota, and Wyoming than with Quebec or the Maritime provinces. Similar values around energy development, individual freedom, and limited government regulation create what some describe as natural alignment with American conservatism. But here's what mainstream media isn't telling you about this movement. In my view, this isn't just spontaneous grassroots anger. There appears to be organization behind these petition drives, coordination, planning, and according to some sources, significant financial backing. Unverified claims suggest that this petition movement is being supported by both Alberta business interests and, potentially, American energy companies who would benefit from direct access to Alberta's resources without Canadian federal interference. I cannot verify these claims, but the level of organization visible in these viral videos suggests this isn't random citizen activism. Let me be clear about what we're witnessing, based on my analysis of available information. This represents the most serious challenge to Canadian territorial integrity since the Quebec independence movement of the 1990s. But unlike Quebec, which wanted independence as a separate nation, Alberta separatists apparently want to join another country entirely. The legal and constitutional questions are staggering. According to Canadian constitutional law, provinces cannot unilaterally secede. The process would require federal approval, provincial referendums, and complex negotiations. But here's the twist some people claim. What if the United States actively supported Alberta's petition for statehood? Some sources suggest that American statehood could theoretically bypass Canadian constitutional requirements. If a territory petitioned the U.S. Congress for statehood while simultaneously declaring independence from Canada, it would create an unprecedented international situation. I want to emphasize these are unconfirmed theories, but they highlight the complexity of what's happening. Now let's talk about the broader implications, because this isn't just about Alberta. According to some reports, similar movements may be gaining support in Saskatchewan and parts of rural Manitoba. The entire Canadian prairies could potentially be looking south rather than east toward Ottawa. The economic implications for Canada would be catastrophic. Alberta provides roughly 30% of federal government revenues through taxes and royalties. Losing Alberta would eliminate billions in annual federal income while maintaining all federal spending obligations. Canada's fiscal position would become unsustainable overnight. For the United States, the strategic value would be enormous. Direct control over Alberta's oil sands would make America effectively energy independent. No more reliance on unstable foreign suppliers. No more vulnerability to Middle Eastern supply disruptions. Alberta as a U.S. state would represent the largest energy acquisition in American history. But here's where my analysis gets really concerning. If certain allegations prove true about the organization behind this movement, we might be witnessing something unprecedented. The peaceful territorial expansion of the United States through invited annexation rather than conquest or purchase. The historical parallels are limited but significant. Texas voluntarily joined the United States in 1845 after independence from Mexico. Hawaii was annexed after American business interests orchestrated the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom. But Alberta would represent something different. A developed, resource-rich territory, voluntarily leaving one developed nation to join another. The geopolitical ramifications extend far beyond North America. If the United States can successfully acquire Alberta through petition and political pressure, what prevents similar movements elsewhere? Could resource-rich regions of other countries petition for American statehood if they feel neglected by their national governments? According to some industry sources, the timing of this movement isn't coincidental. There are rumors that recent American policy changes have made statehood more attractive to Alberta, while simultaneously making Canadian federation less appealing. The combination of American opportunity and Canadian frustration creates what some describe as a perfect storm for separation. Now, let me share what I think is really happening here, based on my analysis of all available information. This petition movement represents a strategic gambit that goes far beyond provincial politics. It's a negotiating tactic designed to force fundamental changes in the Canadian federal system. In my opinion, most petition signers probably don't expect immediate American statehood. They're sending a message to Ottawa. Address Alberta's concerns, or we'll seriously explore alternatives. The petition serves as leverage in federal-provincial negotiations about carbon taxes, pipeline approvals, and resource revenue sharing. But here's what makes this particularly dangerous for Canadian unity. Once you normalize the idea of leaving Canada for the United States, that idea doesn't disappear just because Ottawa makes concessions. It becomes a permanent option in the political toolkit. And during future federal-provincial disputes, the American alternative will always be there. The psychological barrier against separation has been crossed. Thousands of Albertans have publicly declared their willingness to abandon Canadian citizenship for American statehood. That's not something you can walk back easily. The political consciousness has shifted from "we're unhappy Canadians" to "we might be happier Americans." Some unverified government communications suggest that Ottawa is taking this movement more seriously than public statements indicate. There are claims of emergency cabinet meetings, federal ministers dispatched to Alberta for private meetings, and potential policy reversals designed to address Alberta's concerns before this movement gains further momentum. But according to some people familiar with Alberta politics, the federal response might be too little, too late. The petition movement has tapped into decades of accumulated resentment that goes beyond specific policy disagreements. It's about fundamental questions of political identity and cultural belonging. Let me present the counterargument, because balanced analysis requires considering all perspectives. Many political experts argue this petition movement represents a small minority of Albertans amplified by social media virality. They point out that formal polling often shows much lower support for separation than viral videos suggest. These experts argue that Alberta's economy remains deeply integrated with Canada through shared currency, banking systems, trade relationships, and regulatory frameworks. Separation would disrupt these relationships in ways that could harm Alberta's economic interests, even if American statehood were achieved. There are also serious questions about whether the United States would actually accept Alberta as a state. Congressional approval would be required. The political complications of admitting a territory that unilaterally declared independence from a major U.S. ally could outweigh the economic benefits. Furthermore, according to some observers, this movement might actually strengthen Canadian federalism by forcing long-overdue conversations about provincial autonomy, resource revenue sharing, and regional representation in federal institutions. But in my view, dismissing this movement as fringe activism misses the broader significance. Even if these specific petitions don't lead to immediate political change, they represent a fundamental shift in how Albertans view their relationship with Canada. And that shift has implications that extend far beyond provincial boundaries. The viral nature of these petition videos demonstrates something profound about political communication in the digital age. Ideas that might have remained local grievances can now become international movements through social media amplification. The petition lines in Alberta aren't just local news, they're global content that shapes international perceptions of Canadian stability. This brings us to the international dimensions. According to some foreign policy analysts, this Alberta movement is being watched carefully by other countries dealing with regional separatism. The Scottish independence movement, Catalonian separatism in Spain, and various regional movements across Europe are all observing whether peaceful territorial transfer between developed nations is possible in the modern era. If Alberta successfully joins the United States, it establishes a precedent that could destabilize national boundaries worldwide. Conversely, if the movement fails, it might demonstrate that existing international law and diplomatic pressure can prevent such territorial transfers even when they appear voluntary. The energy security implications deserve special attention. According to industry speculation, American control of Alberta's oil sands would fundamentally alter global energy markets. The United States would become the world's largest oil producer, with reserves rivaling Saudi Arabia. This would shift geopolitical power in ways we're only beginning to understand. Some sources claim that other energy-producing regions are watching Alberta's movement closely. Could similar petitions emerge in energy-rich areas of other countries? The Alberta precedent might inspire movements from Scotland's North Sea oil regions to Norway's petroleum-producing areas to petition for American statehood based on energy security arguments. Now, let me address what I think is the most important aspect of this story that isn't getting enough attention. This isn't really about Alberta joining America. This is about the failure of Canadian political institutions to manage regional diversity and economic conflict. Canada has struggled for decades with the challenge of uniting vastly different regions under a single federal system. Atlantic provinces dependent on federal transfers, Quebec protecting its distinct culture, Ontario dominating federal politics through population, and Western provinces feeling economically exploited. Alberta's petition movement is the logical culmination of these unresolved tensions. The deeper question is whether any federal system can successfully manage such regional diversity when economic interests are fundamentally misaligned. Alberta produces energy that the federal government restricts. Quebec receives equalization payments that Alberta funds. Ontario controls federal policy that affects Alberta's economy. These aren't technical policy disputes, they're structural contradictions. According to some theories within political science, federal systems work when regions have complementary interests or shared threats that require cooperation. But when regions have fundamentally conflicting economic interests and no external threats requiring unity, federal bonds weaken over time. Alberta's petition movement might represent the early stages of this federal breakdown, not because Albertans suddenly became anti-Canadian, but because the federal system no longer serves their interests effectively. And when political systems stop serving constituent interests, those constituents start looking for alternatives. The American alternative is particularly attractive because the United States offers everything Alberta wants from Canada but can't get: energy-friendly policies, lower taxes, stronger property rights, and political systems that respond to local economic interests rather than distant federal priorities. This raises uncomfortable questions about Canadian national identity. If significant numbers of Albertans prefer American citizenship to Canadian citizenship, what does that say about the success of Canadian nation-building? Has Canada failed to create sufficiently strong national bonds to overcome regional economic conflicts? Some cultural analysts suggest that Alberta has always been more American than Canadian in fundamental values and lifestyle. Individualism over collectivism, free markets over government regulation, energy development over environmental protection. From this perspective, the petition movement represents Albertans finally acknowledging their true cultural preferences. But others argue this represents a failure of Canadian political leadership to articulate compelling national vision that transcends regional economic interests. Instead of managing oil and climate policy as national strategic questions, federal politicians turned them into regional political battles that pit Alberta against the rest of Canada. The role of social media in amplifying this movement cannot be ignored. Traditional political movements required years to build support through conventional organizing. But viral videos can create apparent mass movements overnight, even if the underlying support is shallow or temporary. The petition lines in Alberta look impressive in short video clips, but we don't know how representative those images are of broader Alberta opinion. Social media creates the appearance of mass political movements that might represent relatively small numbers of highly motivated activists. This highlights a fundamental challenge in modern democracy. How do we distinguish between genuine political movements and social media phenomena? How do we measure actual political support versus viral content engagement? These questions become crucial when territorial integrity is at stake. According to some observers familiar with Alberta politics, this petition movement represents the intersection of long-term political grievances and short-term social media amplification. The underlying frustrations are real and deep, but the apparent mass support might be more limited than viral videos suggest. However, even if current support is limited, political movements can gain momentum through visibility and normalization. The more people see others signing separation petitions, the more acceptable the idea becomes. Social psychology suggests that publicly expressed political preferences can shift private opinions over time. This brings us to what I consider the most critical question. What happens next? Based on my analysis of the available information, several scenarios seem possible. First scenario. The petition movement remains primarily symbolic. Ottawa makes policy concessions on carbon taxes, pipeline approvals, or equalization payments. Alberta's immediate grievances are addressed, and separation sentiment subsides. But the precedent remains for future federal-provincial conflicts. Second scenario. The movement gains sufficient momentum to force a provincial referendum on American statehood. Even if the referendum fails, it fundamentally alters Canadian political dynamics by legitimizing separation as a viable option for provinces dissatisfied with federal policy. Third scenario. The movement succeeds in generating formal separation proceedings. Alberta declares independence or petitions the United States for statehood. This triggers a constitutional crisis that could fragment Canada entirely, with other provinces reconsidering their own federal relationships. Fourth scenario. The United States actively encourages the movement as a strategy for acquiring Alberta's energy resources. American political support transforms this from a Canadian domestic issue into an international territorial dispute between allied nations. Each scenario carries enormous implications not just for Canada and Alberta, but for international law, federal systems worldwide, and the precedent for peaceful territorial transfer in the modern era. In my opinion, the most likely outcome combines elements of several scenarios. Ottawa will make some policy concessions to reduce immediate Alberta grievances, but the underlying structural tensions in Canadian federalism will remain unresolved. Future federal-provincial conflicts will revive separation sentiment, potentially with greater intensity. The American option, once normalized through this petition movement, becomes a permanent feature of Alberta political consciousness. Future Alberta governments will have enhanced leverage in federal negotiations because the alternative of American statehood remains viable. This fundamentally changes Canadian federation dynamics. The federal government can no longer take Alberta's continued participation for granted. Every major policy decision affecting Alberta must consider the risk of pushing the province towards separation and potential American statehood. The international implications extend far beyond North America. Other federal systems facing regional separatism will observe whether territorial transfer between developed nations is possible through petition and political pressure. Success in Alberta could inspire similar movements worldwide, but failure could demonstrate that international law, diplomatic pressure, and existing federal institutions can prevent such territorial transfers, even when they appear voluntary. The Alberta case might become a test of whether modern nation-states can maintain territorial integrity against regional separatism backed by foreign alternatives. What's your view on this developing situation? Do you think Alberta's petition movement represents genuine political change or social media amplification of minority grievances? How should Canada respond to preserve national unity while addressing legitimate provincial concerns? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more analysis of the stories reshaping our world. Remember, this analysis is based on publicly available sources and represents my interpretation of complex political developments that continue to evolve. The lines forming in Alberta aren't just about provincial politics. They're about the future of federal systems, the power of social media to reshape political movements, and the possibility that peaceful territorial transfer might be possible in ways we never imagined. Whatever happens next, January 2026 might be remembered as the moment when Canadian unity faced its greatest test since Confederation. And the world is watching to see whether democracy, federalism, and international law can manage this challenge, or whether we're witnessing the beginning of a new era where territorial boundaries become negotiable through petition and political pressure. The answer will shape not just North America, but the entire international system for decades to come.